There is a particular kind of warmth that comes from a bakery in the early morning hours, before the sun has fully risen, when the world is still wrapped in the soft blanket of night. It's a warmth that seeps into your bones and settles there, like a promise that everything will be all right. This is the warmth you would find at Clara's Bakery, nestled on the corner of Elm Street and 4th Avenue in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and kindness was passed around as freely as butter on fresh bread. Clara had owned the bakery for 37 years. She had inherited it from her mother, who had inherited it from her mother before that. The building itself was over 100 years old, with brick walls that had weathered countless storms and wooden floors that creaked in all the familiar places. The front window was large and inviting, always clean despite the flour dust that seemed to coat everything inside. Through that window, passers-by could see the glass cases filled with golden croissants, cinnamon rolls glazed to perfection, and loaves of bread with crusts so perfect they crackled when you broke them open. But it wasn't just the appearance of the bakery that drew people in. It was something else, something harder to define. Some said it was the smell, that intoxicating blend of yeast and sugar, butter and vanilla, cinnamon and cardamom that drifted down the street like an invisible ribbon, pulling people toward the door. Others said it was Clara herself, with her gentle smile and the way she remembered everyone's favorite pastry without having to ask. Clara would arrive at the bakery at 3 o'clock every morning. She never needed an alarm clock anymore. Her body simply knew when it was time. She would unlock the heavy wooden door, flip on the lights, and tie her apron around her waist. The same faded blue apron she'd worn for decades, soft from countless washings, with her name embroidered in yellow thread across the front. The bakery would be cool and quiet at that hour, holding the stillness of night like a secret. Clara would walk through the front room, past the small round tables with their checkered tablecloths, past the counter with its antique cash register that still dinged when the drawer opened, and into the kitchen beyond. The kitchen was her sanctuary. Stainless steel counters gleamed under fluorescent lights. The ovens, 2 large ones that had been installed when Clara was just a girl, hummed with potential. Shelves lined the walls, holding bags of flour, jars of spices, and containers of chocolate chips and dried fruit. Everything had its place, and Clara knew where everything was without looking. She would begin, as she always did, by preheating the ovens. The sound of them warming up was like a gentle roar, a dragon waking from slumber. Then she would gather her ingredients, measuring out flour with practiced hands, cracking eggs with a single tap against the bowl's edge, cutting butter into perfect cubes that would soon be incorporated into dough. There was a rhythm to baking that Clara had learned long ago, a kind of meditation. Her hands moved through the motions while her mind drifted to other things. Memories of her mother teaching her to shape baguettes, thoughts of her daughter who now lived in the city and called every Sunday, plans for next week's special, which she was thinking might be her grandmother's blueberry scones. As she worked, the bakery began to transform, the ovens filled with sheet pans of croissants, their layers of butter and dough rising and browning to a perfect golden color. Loaves of sourdough, their starters tended like beloved pets, fed and nurtured for years, rose in their proofing baskets, developing those beautiful bubbles and patterns that made each loaf unique. Cinnamon rolls swirled with brown sugar and spice, their tops glistening with glaze that dripped down their sides like morning dew. By 5:30, when the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, the bakery smelled like heaven itself had taken up residence on Elm Street. And that's when the first customers would begin to arrive. There was Mr. Patterson, who came every morning at 5:45 sharp for his bran muffin and black coffee. He'd been coming for 23 years, ever since he retired from the postal service. He would sit at the table by the window, reading his newspaper and occasionally nodding hello to other early risers. Then came the Hendersons, a young couple who both worked at the hospital and stopped by for blueberry muffins before their shift. They were always holding hands, even after 5 years of marriage, and Clara found that terribly sweet. Sarah Chen, who owned the flower shop 3 doors down, arrived at 6:15 for a chocolate croissant and a cappuccino. She always had dirt under her fingernails from the morning's work with her flowers, and she smelled like roses and earth, a lovely combination that Clara thought went surprisingly well with chocolate. These morning customers were Clara's favorites, though she would never say so out loud. They were the quiet ones, the ones who greeted the day with contemplation rather than chaos. They appreciated the stillness, the way the morning light slanted through the window and made the sugar on the pastries sparkle like tiny diamonds. They understood that a bakery in the early hours wasn't just about food. It was about comfort, ritual, and the small pleasures that made life bearable. Clara would move behind the counter, pulling pastries from the case with sheets of wax paper, pouring coffee into thick ceramic mugs, making small talk that was warm but never intrusive. She had learned over the years when someone wanted to chat and when they simply wanted to be left alone with their thoughts and their breakfast. By 7 o'clock, the bakery would begin to fill with a different crowd. Parents rushing in to grab something quick for their kids' breakfast, business people in suits ordering lattes to go, groups of teenagers stopping by before school. The energy would shift, becoming more urgent, more electric. Clara's daughter Emma would arrive to help with the morning rush, tying on her own apron and taking her place at the espresso machine. Emma had her mother's hands and her grandmother's eyes. She was 28 now, working as a graphic designer in the city, but still coming back every weekend to help at the bakery. Clara knew that Emma loved the bakery, even though she'd chosen a different path. You could see it in the way she handled the pastries with care, the way she remembered regular customers' names, the way she sometimes hummed while she worked. The same tuneless melody Clara's mother used to hum while kneading dough. The morning rush would last until about 9:30, and then things would calm down again. Clara would take a moment to sit at one of the small tables with a cup of tea and a piece of whatever hadn't sold perfectly, maybe a croissant with one corner slightly more brown than the others, or a scone that had cracked a bit in the oven. These imperfect pastries tasted just as good, and Clara had learned long ago not to waste anything. This was her favorite time of day, this in-between moment when the early birds had left and the lunch crowd hadn't yet arrived. The bakery would be quiet except for the occasional customer browsing the cases, and the light would stream through the front window in thick golden beams, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. Clara would sit with her tea and think about how lucky she was. Not everyone got to spend their days creating things that brought people joy. Not everyone got to be part of people's daily rituals, their celebrations, their small comforts. A birthday cake from Clara's bakery, a loaf of sourdough for Sunday dinner, cookies for a school bake sale, croissants for a special breakfast in bed. She was part of the fabric of this town, woven into its daily life as surely as the threads in her old blue apron. And that, she thought, was something worth getting up at 3 a.m. for. Outside the window, the town was fully awake now. People walked past with their dogs, headed to work, ran errands. The flower shop was open, Sarah arranging buckets of fresh blooms on the sidewalk. The hardware store across the street was raising its metal shutters. The coffee shop 2 blocks down, which Clara didn't mind because people who wanted coffee could get it there, and people who wanted pastries came to her, was serving its own morning customers. Life went on, as it always did, in its reliable, comforting patterns. And Clara was grateful to be exactly where she was, doing exactly what she was doing, in this bakery that smelled like home. Every bakery has its regulars, but at Clara's, the regulars were like extended family. They came not just for the food, but for the sense of belonging, for the familiar faces and the comfort of routine. Clara knew their stories, their joys and sorrows, their favorite treats and their food allergies. She knew when to offer congratulations and when to offer condolences, and when to simply offer a warm cinnamon roll and a sympathetic ear. Take Mrs. Dorothy Walker, for instance. She was 83 years old and had been coming to the bakery every Tuesday and Friday morning for as long as Clara could remember. She always wore a hat, a different one each time, some with flowers, some with feathers, some with elaborate veils. Her late husband had bought her a new hat every year for their anniversary, and she had quite a collection now. She said wearing them made her feel like he was still with her somehow. Mrs. Walker always ordered the same thing, a slice of lemon poppy seed cake and a pot of Earl Grey tea. She would sit at the table in the corner, the one with the cushioned chair that was easiest on her back, and she would spend exactly 1 hour there. Sometimes she read books from the library. Sometimes she did crossword puzzles. Sometimes she simply watched the world go by through the window. Clara had learned that Mrs. Walker's Tuesdays and Fridays at the bakery were sacred to her. After her husband died, she told Clara once, the days had all started to blur together. It was too easy to let one day slip into the next without purpose, without reason to get dressed or brush her hair or put on one of her lovely hats. So she had decided to create structure, to give herself reasons to leave the house, places to go, things to look forward to. Your lemon cake gives me something to anticipate, she'd said to Clara, patting her hand across the counter. It's important to have things to anticipate, dear. Otherwise, what's the point? Clara had thought about those words many times since. Mrs. Walker was right. Life needed its small anticipations, its simple pleasures scattered throughout the days and weeks, like stepping stones across a stream. Then there was James Rodriguez, a construction worker with hands as big as dinner plates and a heart to match. He came in every morning at 6:30, right in the middle of the rush, still wearing his work boots and his dusty jeans. He would buy coffee and a breakfast sandwich, egg, cheese, and sausage on one of Clara's homemade biscuits. And he'd also buy a dozen assorted cookies, which he'd take to whatever job site he was working on that day to share with his crew. "The guys look forward to it," he'd tell Clara with a grin. "Makes the day start right, you know? Can't work on an empty stomach, and can't work well without something sweet to look forward to at break time." James had 3 daughters, all under the age of 10, and sometimes on Saturdays he'd bring them in for hot chocolate and whatever cookie they wanted from the case. The girls would press their faces against the glass, debating seriously between chocolate chip and snickerdoodle, between frosted sugar cookies and oatmeal raisin. James would stand behind them, patient and smiling, in no rush at all. Clara loved watching fathers with their children. There was something so tender about it. The way these big, strong men would crouch down to their daughter's eye level, would seriously consider their opinions on cookies as if they were discussing matters of great importance. And perhaps they were. Perhaps teaching your children that their preferences matter, that their choices are respected, was indeed a matter of great importance. Another regular was Thomas Kim, a high school English teacher who came in every afternoon at 3:30, right after school let out. He was in his early 40s, soft-spoken and kind, always with a canvas bag full of papers to grade slung over his shoulder. He'd order a slice of whatever cake Clara had made that day and a cup of coffee, and he'd sit at the same table every time, pulling out his red pen and working through his students' essays. Sometimes he'd chuckle at something a student had written. Sometimes he'd shake his head, but always with fondness, never with frustration. Once, Clara had asked him how he could stand reading the same assignment 40 times in a row. "Oh, but they're never the same," he'd said, looking up with surprise, as if he couldn't imagine anyone thinking otherwise. Every student sees the book differently, interprets the themes their own way. It's fascinating, really, like looking at the same painting with 40 different people and hearing 40 different interpretations. They all notice different details, focus on different moments. It keeps the books alive for me. Clara had thought that was a beautiful way to look at it. She supposed it was a bit like baking. She made the same croissants every day, but somehow each batch was slightly different. The weather affected how the dough rose. The mood she was in affected how gently she shaped them. The stories customers told her as she worked affected what she thought about while they baked. The same recipe every time, but never quite identical. Then there were the young mothers who came in mid-morning after dropping their older kids at school, pushing strollers with babies or toddlers strapped in. They'd order decaf coffee and whatever looked good, and they'd sit together at the larger table near the back, talking in the way that mothers do, about sleep schedules and teething and preschool options, but also about their own dreams and frustrations and fears. Clara always gave the children small sugar cookies shaped like animals, free of charge. The mothers would protest, but Clara would wave them off. "It's just a cookie," she'd say, "and it's worth it to see them smile." But it was more than that, really. Clara remembered those years when Emma was small, how isolating they could be, how exhausting. She remembered the way a small kindness from a stranger could make her want to cry with gratitude. She remembered how important it was to feel seen, to feel like someone understood that you were doing your best, and that your best was enough. On weekends, the bakery saw different crowds. Saturday mornings brought families, parents and children coming in for donuts and kolaches, treating the bakery visit like a small weekly adventure. Clara always kept a basket of coloring books and crayons near the children's table, and the kids would sit there happily decorating pictures of cakes and cookies while their parents enjoyed their coffee in relative peace. Sunday mornings had a different rhythm entirely. People came in after church, dressed in their good clothes, moving a bit more slowly, speaking a bit more quietly. They'd buy whole loaves of bread for Sunday dinner, or pies to bring to family gatherings, or boxes of pastries to enjoy with the Sunday paper spread across their dining room tables. And then there were the special occasions, the couples who came in to order wedding cakes, young and nervous and so in love, it seemed to radiate off them like heat. The parents ordering birthday cakes, describing in detail what would make their child's eyes light up. The people ordering goodbye cakes for colleagues who were retiring, moving away, starting new chapters. Clara took all these orders seriously, writing everything down in her worn notebook, asking questions, making sketches. She understood that these cakes mattered, that they would be in photographs, in memories, that years later someone might say, "Remember that amazing cake from Clara's?" and smile. One of her favorite regular customers was a man named Peter, who came in every Friday evening just before closing time. He was in his 60s, always well dressed in a cardigan and pressed slacks, always carrying a worn leather messenger bag. He would buy 6 cookies, 2 chocolate chip, 2 oatmeal raisin, and 2 of whatever the special was that week. And he'd ask Clara to pack them in individual bags. It had taken months before Clara learned why. Peter was a volunteer at the homeless shelter 3 blocks away, and he handed out the cookies on Friday nights to whoever was staying there. "It's not much," he'd said when Clara finally asked, "but everyone deserves something sweet sometimes. Everyone deserves to feel thought of." After that, Clara started giving him extra cookies, waving away his attempts to pay. "For the shelter," she'd say firmly. "And don't argue with me, Peter. I'm old, and I'll win." He'd laugh and accept the extra bags, and Clara would feel a warm glow in her chest that lasted all through the evening. These were her people, these regulars who came day after day, week after week, year after year. They were the reason she kept the bakery open, even though she could have retired by now. They were the reason she still got up at 3 in the morning, still made everything from scratch, still cared deeply about the quality of every single pastry that left her shop. Because it wasn't really about the pastries, she'd realized long ago. It was about creating a space where people felt welcome, where they could mark the passage of time with familiar rituals, where they could find comfort in the midst of their busy, complicated lives. It was about being part of a community, about the 1,000 small ways people took care of each other without even realizing they were doing it. Mrs. Walker, in her beautiful hats, anticipating her lemon cake. James sharing cookies with his construction crew. Thomas grading papers over coffee and cake. The young mothers finding solidarity and support. Peter bringing sweetness to people who had so little. The families making memories on Saturday mornings. the couples planning their futures over wedding cake consultations. This was the real recipe for the bakery's success, Clara thought. Not the perfect ratio of flour to butter, not the precise oven temperature or the timing of the rise. It was simply love. Love baked into every item, love offered to every customer, love returned in loyalty and friendship and community. And on quiet afternoons, when the lunch rush had ended and the after-school crowd hadn't yet arrived, Clara would stand behind her counter and feel overwhelmed with gratitude for this life she'd built, one pastry at a time. Every baker has their secrets, techniques passed down through generations, ratios they've perfected over years of trial and error, ingredients they swear make all the difference. Clara had her share of these secrets, of course. She knew that a pinch of cardamom elevated her cinnamon rolls from good to transcendent. She knew that letting her pie dough rest overnight made it easier to work with and resulted in a flakier crust. She knew that the water in this particular town, with its specific mineral content, was part of what made her bread taste the way it did. But there was another secret, one that Clara had never quite put into words, even to herself. It was about the way she felt when she baked, the intention she put into every item she made. Some might call it silly, this idea that emotions could somehow be kneaded into dough or folded into batter, but Clara believed it all the same. When she made her bread, the sourdough loaves with their deep, complex flavor, she thought about sustenance and strength. She thought about the way bread had been the foundation of meals for thousands of years, how it had fed families through hard times and good times alike. She thought about the word companion, which came from Latin words meaning with bread. To break bread with someone was to share life with them. When she made her cinnamon rolls, those spirals of sweetness that people bought on Sunday mornings or for special breakfasts, she thought about comfort and celebration. She thought about lazy weekends and children's laughter and the way a sweet treat could transform an ordinary morning into something memorable. When she made her chocolate chip cookies, still warm from the oven, the chocolate still melted and gooey. She thought about childhood and simplicity, and the way some pleasures remain perfect no matter how old you get. When she made her wedding cakes, those elaborate creations with their delicate decorations and perfect icing, she thought about love and commitment and the hope that fills a person's heart when they're standing on the edge of a new life with someone they've chosen to walk beside. And when she made the birthday cakes, whether simple or complex, for children or adults, she thought about the preciousness of life, about the miracle that any of us are here at all, about the worth of marking another year, another revolution around the sun. Was this just Clara being sentimental? Perhaps, but she didn't think so. She'd read once about experiments where plants grew better when people spoke kindly to them. She'd read about how stress could change the chemical composition of breast milk. She'd read about how the heart had its own electromagnetic field that could affect the people around us. If thoughts and feelings could do all that, why couldn't they affect food as well? Her mother had believed in this too, though she'd spoken of it differently. Cook with love, she used to say. People can taste the difference. Her grandmother had said the same thing, adding, "And never, ever bake when you're angry. The bread will know." So Clara was careful about her state of mind when she worked. If she found herself frustrated or upset, she would pause and take a few deep breaths. She would think about why she was doing this work, would call to mind the faces of her customers, would remember what a gift it was to create food that nourished and delighted people. Sometimes, on difficult days, she would play music while she worked. She had an old radio in the kitchen, and she'd tune it to the classical station. There was something about Vivaldi or Mozart or Debussy that seemed to smooth out the rough edges of her mood, that helped her find her center again. Emma had noticed this practice years ago and asked her about it. "Why do you always want to be in a good mood when you bake?" she'd asked. "I mean, obviously it's nicer for you, but does it really matter to the food?" Clara had thought carefully about how to answer. She didn't want Emma to think she was foolish or superstitious. "I'm not sure if it matters to the food," she'd finally said, "but I know it matters to me. When I bake with love and attention, I notice more. I'm more careful. I'm more present. And I think, I hope, that results in better pastries. But even if it doesn't, even if the pastries turn out exactly the same either way, I'd rather spend my days feeling loving than feeling resentful. I'd rather enjoy the work than resent it." Emma had nodded slowly, understanding, and Clara had noticed that when Emma worked at the bakery, she adopted the same practice. She'd put on music she liked. She'd hum to herself. She'd smile as she worked, even when she was tired. There was another aspect to Clara's secret ingredient, beyond just her own emotions. It was about paying attention to the people she was baking for. When Mrs. Walker ordered her lemon poppy seed cake, Clara thought about her as she made it. She thought about those beautiful hats and that faithful attendance every Tuesday and Friday. She thought about what it meant to create rituals that gave shape to your days. And somehow, thinking about Mrs. Walker while making her cake felt like putting a little bit of care directly into that specific item. When James ordered his breakfast sandwich and his dozen cookies, Clara thought about him sharing those cookies with his crew, about the way small acts of generosity ripple outward, about how feeding people was one of the most basic and beautiful ways to show that you cared. When someone came in to order a birthday cake, Clara would ask questions, not just about flavors and decorations, but about the person whose birthday it was. What did they like? What would make them smile? And as she baked that cake, she'd think about that person, that stranger she'd never met. And she'd put good wishes into the batter. "Happy birthday, whoever you are. May this year be good to you." Was this magical thinking? Maybe. But Clara had noticed over the years that the cakes she made with the most attention, the most thought about the recipient, seemed to be the ones people remembered. They'd come back months later and say, "That cake you made for my daughter's birthday was incredible. She still talks about it." Or, "The wedding cake was exactly perfect. It was like you knew exactly what we wanted, even the parts we couldn't put into words." Clara would smile and thank them, and she'd think, "Yes, because I paid attention, because I cared, because I put love into it." There was also something to be said for the quality of ingredients, of course. Clara was particular about what she used. She bought her flour from a mill 3 hours away that stone ground their wheat. She used butter from a local dairy where the cows grazed on grass. Her vanilla was real vanilla, extracted from actual beans, not the artificial flavoring that would have been cheaper and easier. Her chocolate was high quality, rich and complex. Her eggs came from a farm where the chickens roamed free and ate a varied diet. All of this cost more. All of this meant her prices had to be a bit higher than the grocery store bakery across town. But Clara believed, knew, that you could taste the difference. That when you bit into one of her croissants, the butter wasn't just fat. It was the distilled essence of grass and sunshine and careful farming. The flour wasn't just ground wheat. It was the result of someone's dedication to doing things the old way, the better way. And when you combined high-quality ingredients with skill and attention, and yes, love, something almost magical happened. The food transcended its basic components. It became more than just fuel for the body. It became nourishment for the soul. Clara had seen this in action countless times. The way someone's face would soften when they bit into a fresh cinnamon roll. The way they'd close their eyes for just a moment, savoring. The way they'd sigh with satisfaction. The way they'd say, "Oh my God, that's so good," with genuine surprise, as if they'd forgotten food could taste like this. Those moments made everything worth it. The early mornings, the sore feet, the burns from hot pans, the occasional disasters when something didn't turn out quite right. It was all worth it for those moments of pure pleasure she could give to people. Because in the end, that's what Clara's secret ingredient really was, the sincere desire to bring joy to others. It was as simple and as profound as that. She wanted people to taste her food and feel happy. She wanted to brighten someone's difficult day. She wanted to make celebrations more celebratory and ordinary mornings a little more special. She wanted, in her own small way, to make the world a bit softer, a bit kinder, a bit sweeter. And if that came through in her baking, if people could somehow taste the love and care she put into every item, then that was its own kind of magic. The everyday magic of showing up, of doing your work well, of caring about the details, of thinking about others. That was the secret ingredient that no one could copy, that couldn't be written into a recipe. It was the ingredient that made Clara's Bakery more than just a place to buy bread and pastries. It made it a place where people felt cared for, where they felt that someone was glad they existed, where they could taste in every bite the simple but radical message: you are worth this care, this attention, this love. And that, Clara thought as she shaped another loaf of bread with her capable hands, was the best recipe of all. The bakery changed with the seasons, and Clara loved this about her work. Each season brought its own flavors, its own rituals, its own particular kind of beauty. Spring came early to the town, usually arriving in late March with tentative warmth and the first brave flowers pushing through the soil. Clara would watch from her bakery window as the world came back to life. Trees budding, grass greening, people shedding their heavy winter coats and walking with a new lightness in their step. At the bakery, spring meant lemon everything. Lemon bars with their bright, tart filling and buttery shortbread crust. Lemon poppy seed muffins. Lemon cream cakes with delicate icing. Lemon cookies with a glaze that hardened to a sweet tart shell. The citrus seemed to match the mood of the season. Fresh, clean, full of zest and energy. Clara would also make strawberry items once the local berries came into season. She had a relationship with a farmer about 15 miles out of town, and he'd call her when his strawberries were ready. She'd drive out there early in the morning when the berries were still cool with dew, and she'd pick through the flats herself, choosing the best ones. Not too soft, not too hard, perfectly ripe and red all the way through. Those strawberries would become shortcakes with whipped cream. They'd become strawberry tart with almond cream. They'd be folded into muffin batter or used to top cheesecakes or cooked down into jam that she'd layer into thumbprint cookies. Spring also brought Easter, which meant decorated sugar cookies in the shapes of eggs and bunnies and chicks. Clara would spend hours with her icing bags, creating intricate designs, flowers and polka dots, stripes and swirls, every cookie a tiny work of art. Children would press their faces against the glass case, trying to choose which cookie they wanted, each one almost too pretty to eat. Then summer would arrive, gradually at first, and then all at once, with days that stretched long and golden, with heat that made the bakery's air conditioning work overtime, with thunderstorms that rolled through in the late afternoons like nature's drum solo. Summer meant berry pies, blueberry, blackberry, raspberry, and mixed berry. Clara's pie crusts were legendary, flaky and tender, with edges crimped in the traditional style she'd learned from her grandmother. The pies would come out of the oven, bubbling and fragrant, their tops sprinkled with coarse sugar that caught the light like crystals. Summer meant peach cobbler when the peaches came in from the south, their flesh so sweet and juicy that Clara would eat one over the sink before she started baking, letting the juice run down her chin like a child, not caring that she was getting her apron wet. Summer meant ice cream sandwiches, thick, chewy cookies with homemade ice cream pressed between them. Clara would make the ice cream herself in the machine her daughter had bought her for her 60th birthday. Vanilla bean with real flecks of vanilla. Chocolate that was rich and dark. Strawberry made with those same perfect berries from the local farm. Summer also brought the farmer's market, which set up in the town square every Saturday morning. Clara would take a selection of pastries to sell there, scones and muffins, cookies and hand pies. She loved the market, loved the energy of it, the way the whole town seemed to come together. She'd chat with the other vendors, the vegetable farmer, the honey seller, the woman who made soap from goat's milk, the man who carved beautiful wooden bowls. Then autumn would arrive, and it was Clara's favorite season for baking. The air would turn crisp, and the leaves would begin their spectacular show of color, gold and orange and red, like the trees had caught fire, but in the most beautiful way possible. Autumn meant apples. The orchard 20 miles away would open for picking, and Clara would go herself sometimes, walking between the rows of trees, breathing in the scent of apples and earth and fallen leaves. She'd return with bushel after bushel, and then the work would begin. Apple pie, of course, with cinnamon and nutmeg and just a hint of lemon juice to brighten the flavor. Apple turnovers with flaky pastry and a glaze drizzled over the top. Apple cider donuts that people would buy by the dozen, still warm, their exterior coated in cinnamon sugar. Apple bread, dense and moist, studded with walnuts. Apple crisp with an oat topping that got crunchy in the oven. Autumn also meant pumpkin. Clara would buy sugar pumpkins from the same farmer who grew the strawberries, and she'd roast them herself, scraping out the sweet flesh and making her own puree. This puree would become pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving, but also pumpkin bread, pumpkin cookies, pumpkin cheesecake, pumpkin muffins with cream cheese filling. She'd make spice cakes in autumn too, rich with cinnamon and ginger, cloves, and allspice. These cakes reminded people of holidays coming, of family gatherings, of the cozy comfort of being inside when the weather outside turned cold. Halloween brought another opportunity for decorated cookies, cats and bats, ghosts and pumpkins. Clara would use black and orange icing, sometimes adding silver draggies for eyes, creating cookies that were whimsical and fun rather than scary. Children would come in their costumes on Halloween Day, and Clara would give each one a free cookie, delighting in their excitement. Their parents' grateful smiles. Thanksgiving was one of the bakery's busiest times. Clara would take orders for pies weeks in advance. Pumpkin and apple, pecan and cherry, chocolate cream and lemon meringue, sweet potato and banana cream. She'd also make dinner rolls by the hundreds, her classic white rolls that people swore were the best part of their Thanksgiving meal. The week of Thanksgiving, Clara and Emma would work almost around the clock, barely stopping to sleep. The ovens would be going constantly, filling the bakery with smells so incredible that people would stop on the sidewalk just to breathe them in. Clara would be exhausted by Thanksgiving Day, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that comes from working hard at something that matters. Then would come winter, with its short days and long nights, with snow that blanketed the town in white, with frost that made intricate patterns on the bakery's windows. Winter was challenging for a bakery. People didn't want to go out in the cold. Business would slow down, the heating bills would climb. But winter had its own magic too. Winter meant Christmas cookies, dozens of varieties, from simple sugar cookies decorated with colored icing to complex gingerbread houses that took hours to construct. Clara would display the gingerbread houses in the window, and children would press their noses against the glass, marveling at the candy cane columns and the pretzel stick fences, the gummy bear shrubs, and the lifesavers stained glass windows. Winter meant hot chocolate, which Clara made from real chocolate melted into warm milk, topped with whipped cream and a dusting of cocoa powder. She'd serve it in big mugs, and people would wrap their cold hands around them, grateful for the warmth. Winter also meant comfort breads, banana bread and zucchini bread, cranberry orange bread, and chocolate chip bread. These were the breads people bought to have with their morning coffee, to share with neighbors, to enjoy toasted with butter on quiet Sunday mornings. And of course, winter meant the holiday season, which brought its own special rhythm to the bakery. Clara would make Yule logs, chocolate cake rolled with cream filling and decorated to look like tree bark. She'd make Stollen, the traditional German Christmas bread studded with dried fruit and dusted with powdered sugar. She'd make Pfeffernusse, those small spice cookies that her grandmother had made every Christmas. The cycle of seasons was one of the things Clara loved most about her work. It kept the bakery from becoming monotonous, kept her creative and engaged. Just when she was getting tired of making one thing, the season would change and she'd move on to something else. Just when people were getting weary of apples, strawberries would come into season. Just when the last pumpkin pie was sold, it would be time for Christmas cookies. The seasons also marked the passage of time in a way that felt natural and right. Clara could measure her life in strawberry seasons and apple harvests, in Christmas cookies and Easter eggs. She knew she was getting older. Her back reminded her of that every morning when she bent over to put pans in the oven. But the seasons made time feel less like a loss and more like a gift. Another spring meant another chance to make lemon bars. Another autumn meant another opportunity to perfect her apple pie recipe. And through all the seasons, through all the years, the bakery remained a constant, a place where the town gathered, where traditions were kept, where the rhythm of daily life was honored and celebrated, a place that smelled like home, no matter what time of year it was. The building that housed Clara's bakery had been standing for over 100 years, and if walls could talk, these walls would have quite a story to tell. Clara sometimes thought about all the people who had passed through this space, all the hands that had kneaded dough at this counter, all the conversations that had taken place at these tables. The building had been constructed in 1891 by a German immigrant named Friedrich Wober, who had opened the town's first bakery. Clara had a photograph of Friedrich hanging on the wall near the kitchen, a stern-looking man with a magnificent mustache, standing in front of the bakery in his white apron. The photograph was sepia-toned and cracked with age, but Friedrich's pride in his bakery was evident even across the decades. According to the stories Clara's grandmother had told her, Friedrich had been an exacting baker, a perfectionist, who would throw out entire batches if they didn't meet his standards. He'd worked 14-hour days, 7 days a week, until his death in 1923. His son had taken over then, and then his daughter after that, Clara's great-grandmother, Katerina. Katerina had been the one to add the small tables where customers could sit and enjoy their pastries with coffee. Before that, the bakery had been purely a place of business. You came in, you bought your bread, you left. But Katerina understood that people needed gathering places, spaces where they could linger and connect. She'd been right. The tables had transformed the bakery from a shop into a community hub. Clara's grandmother, Helen, had taken over in 1952 after Katerina's arthritis made it impossible for her to continue the physical work of baking. Helen had modernized the bakery, installing the large ovens that Clara still used, adding the refrigerated display case, putting in indoor plumbing for the bathroom. She'd also expanded the menu beyond German specialties to include American favorites: chocolate chip cookies, brownies, apple pie. Helen had run the bakery through some of the town's most difficult years. The 1960s and 70s had brought economic hardship to many small towns, and theirs was no exception. Factories closed, young people moved away to cities for better opportunities. Main streets emptied out. But Helen had kept the bakery open, even when it meant she had to dip into her savings, even when it would have been easier to close up shop and retire. A town without a bakery is a town that's given up, Helen used to say. As long as I can stand, as long as I can lift a bag of flour, this bakery will be here. And she'd been true to her word. The bakery had stayed open, had become even more important to the community during those hard times. When people didn't have much money, they could still come to the bakery for a cup of coffee and conversation. Helen had been known to give away day-old bread to families who were struggling, though she'd do it discreetly, wrapping it up and saying, "Oh, this is just going to go to waste anyway. Won't you take it off my hands?" Clara had learned so much from watching her grandmother work. She'd learned the recipes, yes, but more importantly, she'd learned what it meant to be a keeper of community, a person who held space for others, who created rituals and routines that people could depend on. When Helen died in 1987, Clara's mother, Margaret, had taken over. Margaret had been the shortest tenured owner of the bakery, running it for only 12 years before her own death from breast cancer in 1999. But in those 12 years, she'd left her mark. She'd painted the walls the soft cream color they still were. She'd replaced the old linoleum floor with the wooden planks that now creaked in familiar places. She'd started the tradition of giving children free cookies on their birthdays. Margaret had also been the one to teach Clara that baking was about more than following recipes. "Anyone can follow a recipe," she'd tell Clara as they worked side by side in the kitchen. "But a true baker understands the why behind each step. A true baker can feel when the dough is right, can tell by smell when something is done, can adjust on the fly when things don't go according to plan." Clara had been 31 when her mother died. Emma had been only 5 years old. It had been the hardest year of Clara's life, trying to grieve while also learning to run the bakery on her own, while also being a mother to a young child who didn't understand why Grandma wasn't coming back. But the bakery had saved her in a way. It had given her a reason to get up every morning. It had surrounded her with community, customers who brought casseroles and offered to babysit Emma, who gave her hugs and told her she was doing a great job, who kept coming in day after day, their presence a reminder that life continued, that there was still good in the world, still sweetness to be made and shared. Clara would stand in the kitchen at 3 a.m, measuring flour and cracking eggs, and she would feel her mother there with her, not in a ghostly way, but in the knowledge that lived in her hands, in the rhythm of her movements, in the way she could tell just by looking when a cake was done. Her mother's knowledge, her grandmother's knowledge, her great-grandmother's knowledge, all of it flowing through Clara as she worked. The building itself seemed to hold all these memories. There was a spot near the oven where the floor was slightly darkened from decades of spills. There was a mark on the doorframe where each generation of bakers had recorded their children's heights. There was a loose brick in the wall that Helen had told Clara was good luck to touch before opening the bakery each day. Sometimes, late at night, when Clara was cleaning up after closing, she would pause and just listen to the silence. The building would settle with small creaks and sighs, like an old person easing into a comfortable chair. And Clara would feel the weight of history, the continuity of all these years, all these bakers, all these customers who had passed through these doors. She thought about Friedrich, the stern perfectionist who had started it all. She thought about Katerina, who had understood the importance of creating space for community. She thought about Helen, who had refused to let the bakery close even in the hardest times. She thought about Margaret, who had taught her that baking was an art as much as a science. And she thought about herself, Clara, the current keeper of this legacy. What would she be remembered for? mark would she leave on this place? She hoped it would be this, that she had kept the doors open, that she had maintained the quality and the care, that she had honored the traditions while also staying relevant to each new generation, that she had created a place where people felt welcome, where they could mark the passages of their lives, births and deaths, weddings and graduations, ordinary Tuesdays and special celebrations. The bakery was more than just a business. It was a living connection to the past, a promise to the future, a daily practice of showing up and creating something good. It was a place that held the stories of 5 generations of bakers and countless generations of customers. It was, in its own quiet way, sacred. Clara would run her hand along the old wooden counter, worn smooth by decades of use, and she would feel grateful beyond words that this was her inheritance, this space, this work, this connection to something larger than herself. The walls might not be able to talk, but they didn't need to. Their story was told in the smell of bread that had seeped into the brick, in the worn spots on the floor where thousands of feet had stood, in the photographs on the walls, in the continuing tradition of opening the doors each morning and welcoming people in. And Clara was proud to be part of that story. Of all the relationships in Clara's life, her relationship with her daughter Emma was the most complex and the most precious. Emma was 28 now, living in the city, working as a graphic designer, building a life that looked very different from Clara's own. And yet, every weekend, Emma came back to help at the bakery. Clara had never pressured Emma to take over the bakery. She'd seen what happened when parents tried to force their children into following their footsteps. The resentment, the rebellion, the way it could poison what should have been a gift. Clara loved the bakery, but she wanted Emma to love her own life, whatever shape that took. But Emma kept coming back, not out of obligation, Clara didn't think, but out of something deeper. A connection to her roots, perhaps. A love for the work itself. A desire to maintain the thread that connected her to her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, and all the bakers who had come before. When Emma was little, she'd spent countless hours in the bakery. Clara had brought her to work from the time she was a baby, setting up a playpen in the corner of the kitchen where Emma could play with plastic measuring cups and wooden spoons while Clara worked. As Emma got older, she'd graduated to helping with simple tasks, counting out chocolate chips, pressing fork marks into peanut butter cookies, decorating sugar cookies with sprinkles. Clara had tried to make it fun, never forcing Emma to help, always framing it as a privilege rather than a chore. "Do you want to help Mama make cookies?" she'd ask, and usually Emma did. She'd climb up on her special stool, the one Clara's mother had built with an extra step so Emma could reach the counter, and she'd work alongside Clara, her little hands carefully placing each chocolate chip, her tongue poking out in concentration. Those had been sweet years, even though they'd been hard in other ways. Clara had been newly widowed. Emma's father had died in a car accident when Emma was just 2, and she'd been trying to run the bakery on her own while also raising a young child. Money had been tight. Time had been even tighter. There had been nights when Clara had fallen into bed so exhausted she could barely move. Nights when she'd wondered if she could really do this, if she was enough. But then morning would come, and Emma would pad into Clara's room, her hair messy from sleep, and she'd crawl into bed for a cuddle. And Clara would breathe in the sweet smell of her daughter's hair and think, yes, this is worth it, all of it. As Emma grew older, she'd become more involved in the bakery. By the time she was 12, she could make a batch of chocolate chip cookies from start to finish on her own. By 14, she'd mastered pie crust. By 16, she was working the register and the espresso machine, chatting easily with customers, remembering their usual orders. Clara had wondered, during those teenage years, if Emma would want to take over the bakery someday. Emma seemed to have a natural talent for it. Her hands were quick and sure, her decorating skills were exceptional, and customers loved her warmth and humor. But when it came time for college, Emma had been clear about wanting to study design, not cake decorating, graphic design. She wanted to work with computers, with digital art, with branding and marketing. She wanted to live in a city where there were museums and concerts and diversity that their small town couldn't offer. Clara had felt a pang of disappointment, though she'd tried hard not to show it. She'd always imagined Emma taking over the bakery, had pictured it as the 6th generation of their family running this business. But she'd reminded herself that her job as a mother was to raise Emma to be her own person, not a copy of Clara. So she'd supported Emma's choice. She'd helped her pack for college, had visited her in the city, had listened to her talk about her classes and her internships and her dreams. And she'd been genuinely proud of the woman Emma was becoming, smart and creative and independent. But then Emma had started coming back on weekends to help. At first, Clara had thought it was just because Emma missed home, or because she wanted to help out. But it had continued even after Emma graduated and got a full-time job. Every Saturday and Sunday, Emma would drive the 2 hours from the city, would tie on her apron, and would work alongside Clara, just like she had when she was a kid. One day, about a year ago, Clara had finally asked her about it. They'd been cleaning up after closing, wiping down counters and sweeping the floor, and Clara had said, "Emma, honey, you don't have to keep coming back every weekend. I know you have your own life in the city." Emma had paused in her sweeping and looked up at Clara with surprise. "But I want to come back," she'd said. "I love being here." "Even after working all week at your design job?" "Especially after that," Emma had said, leaning on her broom. "Mom, my job is all about screens and pixels and client revisions. It's creative, and I love it. But it's also kind of intangible, you know? I can spend hours on a logo design, and in the end, it's just an image file. But here," she gestured around the bakery, "here I can make something real. I can shape dough with my hands. I can pull a tray of cookies out of the oven and smell them and taste them. I can hand them to a customer and watch their face light up. It's real in a way my design work isn't." Clara had felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm so glad you feel that way," she'd said softly. "And besides," Emma had continued, "this is our family legacy. Great-great-grandfather Friedrich started this bakery in 1891. That's 134 years of our family baking in this building. I'm not ready to let that end." "But you're not taking over the bakery," Clara had said, wanting to be clear. "You have your career in the city." "Not yet," Emma had said. "But maybe someday. I don't know. I'm not ready to commit to that. But I also don't want to lose my connection to this place, to this work. So for now, I come back on weekends. I keep the tradition alive in my own way." That conversation had meant more to Clara than Emma probably knew. It had reassured her that the bakery would continue, one way or another. Even if Emma never took it over full time, she was keeping the skills alive, maintaining the connection. And maybe, when Clara was ready to retire, they could figure something out. Maybe Emma could move back. Maybe she could run the bakery part-time while still doing her design work. Maybe they could find a solution that honored both Emma's dreams and the family legacy. But that was for the future. For now, Clara treasured these weekends with Emma. She loved working alongside her daughter, loved the easy way they moved around each other in the kitchen after years of practice, loved their conversations as they worked. They talked about everything during those long weekend shifts. Emma would tell Clara about her week, about difficult clients and exciting projects, about her friends in the city and the guy she'd started dating recently. Clara would share bakery stories about Mrs. Walker's new hat, or Thomas the teacher's latest book recommendation, or the couple who'd come in to order a wedding cake. They'd also talk about deeper things, about Emma's father, who Emma barely remembered but wanted to know more about Clara's mother and grandmother, about the women who had shaped them both, about what it meant to build a life, about how to balance personal dreams with family obligations, about how to know when you were making the right choices. And through it all, they'd bake, side by side, their hands moving in similar patterns because Emma had learned from Clara, who had learned from Margaret, who had learned from Helen. The same traditions, the same techniques, passed down like an inheritance more valuable than money. Sometimes, Clara would watch Emma's hands as she worked, shaping a loaf of bread, crimping the edge of a pie, piping frosting onto a cake, and she would see her own hands, her mother's hands, her grandmother's hands, all the way back. She would see the continuation of something that mattered, something that transcended any one person's life, and she would feel deep in her bones that everything was going to be okay. The bakery would go on, the tradition would continue, and Emma, whether she took over the bakery full-time or not, would carry these skills and this knowledge with her throughout her life, would pass them on to her own children someday, would keep the thread unbroken. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. People often asked Clara if she ever got bored, doing the same thing day after day, year after year, making the same breads, the same pastries, following the same routines, waking at 3 a.m, mixing dough, baking, serving customers, cleaning up, going home, sleeping, and doing it all over again. But Clara never got bored. Or rather, she got bored sometimes. She was human, after all. But the boredom never lasted because she'd learned to find the magic in the ordinary, the sacred in the mundane. She'd read once about a Zen monk who said that the most important practice was washing your bowl, not meditation, not chanting, not any elaborate ritual, just the simple act of cleaning your dish after eating, giving it your full attention, treating it as if it were the most important thing in the world in that moment. Clara thought about that often as she worked. She tried to bring that same quality of attention to her baking. When she measured flour, she really measured it, feeling the weight of the cup in her hand, noticing the way the flour puffed slightly as it settled. When she cracked eggs, she paid attention to the sound they made against the bowl, the way the yolk sat perfectly round and golden in the white. When she kneaded dough, she focused on the sensation, the give and resistance of the dough, the way it gradually became smoother and more elastic under her hands. This kind of attention transformed the work. It kept it from becoming mere routine, mere repetition. Each batch of bread was a new opportunity to practice presence. Each pie crust was a chance to refine her technique just slightly. Each customer interaction was an opportunity to make someone's day a little brighter. Clara had learned this approach partly from necessity. In the early days after her mother died, when grief had threatened to overwhelm her, focusing on the immediate task at hand had been a survival strategy. She couldn't think about the crushing weight of loss and also perfectly creamed butter and sugar. So she'd focused on the creaming, had given herself fully to that simple task, and had found that for those few moments, the grief receded. Over time, that coping mechanism had become a practice, a way of being. She'd discovered that when she was fully present with whatever she was doing, she felt more alive, more connected, more content. The work became a form of meditation, a way of anchoring herself in the here and now. And the beautiful thing was that the work itself supported this kind of attention. Baking required presence. You couldn't let your mind wander too much, or you'd forget whether you'd added the salt. You'd leave something in the oven too long. You'd mess up the proportions. Baking demanded that you show up fully. Clara found this especially true with bread. Bread was patient, but also exacting. You had to pay attention to the dough's temperature, to the ambient humidity, to how long you kneaded it, and how long you let it rise. Bread taught you to work with natural processes rather than trying to force them. You couldn't rush bread. You had to wait for it to be ready. There was a lesson in that, Clara thought. In a world that seemed to move faster every year, where everyone was always rushing, always multitasking, always trying to optimize and accelerate, bread insisted on its own timeline. And Clara found something deeply comforting in that, in the way bread connected her to centuries of bakers who had also waited for dough to rise, who had also worked with the rhythms of fermentation and gluten development. The ordinary days at the bakery had their own rhythm, their own poetry. The way the morning light came through the windows at just such an angle at 7:30, the sound of the espresso machine with its hisses and gurgles, the feeling of flour dust settling on her arms by mid-morning, the way her feet would ache by afternoon, a good ache that meant she'd worked hard, the quiet moments between rushes when she could sit with a cup of tea and watch the world go by outside the window. There was also poetry in the regular customers and their habits. The way Mr. Patterson always folded his newspaper in quarters so it would fit on the small table. The way Sarah Chen hummed while she waited for her chocolate croissant to be bagged. The way the Henderson couple always thanked Clara as if she'd done them an enormous favor rather than simply selling them muffins. The way Thomas the teacher would sometimes read particularly good sentences from his students' essays aloud, delighting in their young wisdom. These small observations, these tiny moments of noticing, they were what made the days rich rather than repetitive. They were what transformed ordinary work into something that felt meaningful. Clara thought about how different her life might have been if she'd pursued something else, some career that seemed more exciting or prestigious. She could have gone to culinary school in France, could have competed on baking shows, could have opened a trendy bakery in a big city with lines out the door and articles written about her in food magazines. But she didn't think she would have been happier. There was something about staying in one place, serving one community, perfecting a small set of recipes rather than constantly chasing novelty. There was something about that which felt deeply right to Clara. She thought of a tree she'd seen once, on a trip she'd taken years ago. It was an old oak, maybe 200 years old, growing on a hillside. Its roots went deep into the soil, spreading wide and sure. Its branches reached up and out, providing shade and shelter. Birds nested in it. Squirrels ran along its limbs. In the fall, it dropped acorns that would feed animals through the winter. That tree wasn't trying to be exciting or trendy or impressive. It was just being a tree, doing what trees do, growing, providing, being part of the ecosystem. And in its simple, steady presence, it was magnificent. Clara wanted to be like that tree, rooted in her community, providing sustenance, being reliable and steady, not chasing after novelty or fame, but simply doing her work well, day after day, year after year, being part of the ecosystem of her town, contributing to the web of relationships and rituals that made community possible. There was a phrase she'd heard once, "Bloom where you're planted." She'd always liked that. She'd been planted here, in this small town, in this bakery, in this work, and she'd chosen to bloom here, to sink her roots deep, to grow strong and steady, rather than trying to transplant herself somewhere else. Not that there was anything wrong with people who did transplant themselves, who sought out new opportunities and adventures. Emma had done that, moving to the city, and Clara admired her for it. Different people had different paths, different callings. But for Clara, this was it. This was her path. And she'd learned to find not just contentment in it, but joy. The joy was in the small things, in the smell of bread baking, in the satisfaction of a perfect pie crust, in the smile on a child's face when given a cookie, in the way regulars would seek her out to share news, good and bad, because she'd become someone they trusted, someone who cared. The joy was also in the larger rhythms, in the way the seasons cycled through their changes, each bringing its own flavors and rituals, in the way the years accumulated, each one adding to her skill and knowledge, in the way the bakery remained constant while everything around it changed, new stores opening and closing, new residents moving in, old residents passing away, but the bakery staying, enduring, a fixed point in a changing world. Sometimes people would come into the bakery and say things like, "Oh, you're so lucky to do what you love," or "It must be nice to have such a peaceful job." And Clara would smile and thank them, but inside she'd think, it's not about luck, and it's not always peaceful. It's about choice. It's about deciding to find meaning in your work, to give it your full attention, to treat it as if it matters, because it does matter. Every loaf of bread mattered because someone would eat it, would be nourished by it. Every birthday cake mattered because it would be part of someone's celebration, part of their memories. Every morning, coffee and pastry mattered because it was part of someone's ritual, their way of starting the day right. Clara's work mattered not because it was glamorous or exciting, but because it was useful, because it served a real need, because it contributed to the daily texture of people's lives. And in the end, wasn't that what most of us wanted? To feel useful, to feel that our presence made a difference, to feel that what we did with our days and hours actually mattered to someone. Clara felt that. Every single day she felt it. And that feeling was worth more than all the fame and recognition in the world. So, when people asked if she ever got bored, she could honestly say no. How could she be bored when there was always something to notice, always something to appreciate, always someone to serve? How could she be bored when every day brought its own small miracles, the perfect rise of a loaf, the grateful words of a customer, the way the afternoon sun made the sugar crystals on a cookie sparkle like jewels? The gift of ordinary days was that they were anything but ordinary. Once you learned to really see them, really pay attention, really show up fully for whatever was right in front of you. That was Clara's secret to happiness, if there was such a thing. Not to wait for extraordinary moments, but to find the extraordinary within the ordinary. Not to postpone joy until some imagined future, but to find it here, now, in the work of her hands and the warmth of her community and the simple, profound satisfaction of doing something well. She measured out flour, cracked eggs, shaped dough. She smiled at customers, remembered their preferences, wished them good days. She cleaned her workspace, washed her bowls, turned off the lights at the end of the day. And in these simple, repeated actions, she found her life. Not a perfect life, not an exciting life by most people's standards, but a good life, a meaningful life, a life she was proud to be living. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything.